Okay, we are live here on StreamYard, which is pumping into Clubhouse, as well as to my Facebook page, as well as to Anima Kosai's LinkedIn page. And what's going on here? Well, this is Speaking Up Network featuring Dr. Asma Abdullah from Malaysia, an intercultural scholar, and someone who is trying to unpack the complexities of Malaysian multiculturalism, which in a way might be quite microcosmic of what the world is facing in terms of different people of different ethnicities, meeting up and trying to navigate through each other's lives. And this has been going on for centuries here in Malaysia. So we thought we would actually ask Dr. Asma Abdullah, coming in from Kuala Lumpur, where I am, to talk about multiculturalism and the hard slog ahead. Hi, Dr. Asma. Welcome.
Thank
Good
you,
evening.
Vernon.
Yep,
Good evening.
it's mhm.
Good evening, I suppose, for us. Is then good morning somewhere else.
Yes.
It's a new world of communication, isn't it? You don't
I-
know whether people are just about to get up from bed or going to
in,
bed.
indeed. So here we are. It's 9:43 p.m. here. We
Mhm.
kind of like we're struggling with some technical issues. So we, in a sense, might have started a little later for most people, but here we are,
Yeah.
and we want to be able to, plow through this very difficult, very complicated topic, which is multiculturalism and the hard slog ahead. This
Yep.
is the second episode on Speaking Up Network where we're talking about this. The first episode we had you and Nazrin on a LinkedIn Audio Live episode of the Speaking Up Network. And
Yep.
nevertheless, we're going to have new people joining us. So I think it's quite okay for you to repeat some of the stuff you had said before.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
yeah. So let's go through the stuff as we see it roll out before us.
Sure.
Multiculturalism.
Yeah.
Dr. Asma, can you explain to us in your own words and what you have observed what exactly is multiculturalism?
Okay. Well, I suppose different countries have their own definition of what is multiculturalism as they exist in their respective countries. Um, what I want to do is to share my perspective growing up in Malaysia, where we don't really know whether we are a multicultural society because there has been some recent debate or recent expressions that we have to examine this word multiculturalism. But anyway, based on my experience working in the area, I would like to define multiculturalism as the ability to be contextually appropriate, right? So what does that mean, to be contextually appropriate? It's to recognize the context you are in and be appropriate in that context. So meaning, to be appropriate in that particular context, you must know the hidden dimensions of culture. So that's how I define multiculturalism, Vernon. That you
Okay,
need
so
to
the
understand the context.
there are multiple contexts. Is that what
Yep,
you're saying?
right. So the multiple contexts would be, based on my experience, it's the intracultural context, which is a monocultural um, interface. That when I am
So this is within one culture.
within one culture, within one ethnic group, in the case of Malaysia. So, in other words, you are relating with people who are, I call it programmed or culturally programmed the same way as you are. Like, for example, in Malaysia, I am known, or I am a Malay. So if I am relating with another Malay who went through the same cultural programming, then I am functioning at the intra-cultural level, right? So
Okay, so
that's
then the context is almost the same. We share the same
almost
context.
the same. We speak the same language. We understand things without having to utter it. We just know because of your collective programming of the mind and spirit and body. That's how you define one definition of culture: collective programming of the mind, body, and spirit. So that means there are certain things that are not spoken, right? Because you are functioning at the intra-cultural level. So you don't need to utter it. You know
Right.
because of your similarity in terms of programming. Yeah,
So in a sense, we there are certain assumptions that we make, which we kind of like assume that both sides know, and
correct.
that yeah. So and that's what you mean by context. There's a
Yes,
single context. Okay.
yes,
So that's
yeah.
intraculturality.
Intercultural,
Intraculturality.
intercultural. So when I am communicating, say, with my mother or with my dad or with my sisters or with my relatives, I'll be at the intracultural level. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And
And
af, in addition to the intracultural level, the next
yeah,
level is
the next level will be intercultural. So
uh-huh.
intercultural means I am relating with someone who may not share my values or who did not go through the same um, cultural programming. Like, for example, you and I, we are Malaysians, right? But
Right.
you are Serani, we call you Serani. So if I'm
Yep.
relating with you, we are at the intercultural level. Yeah, because I cannot assume that you know some of the things that I do as a Malay, and you can, and I, and vice versa. So intercultural level is relating with another person from the same country, but of a different ethnic group. So we have
Ah,
this
okay.
in Malaysia. We have this in Malaysia.
Right. So different ethnic groups, different cultural communities,
Yeah,
when they engaged within a larger national landscape,
yeah,
that is known as intercultural.
correct. So, for
Okay, got it.
example, a Malay relating with a Chinese or a Malay working in a Chinese organization, that's when you see intercultural interface.
Okay, interesting. And I believe there is another level.
Okay. The next level would be cross cultural. Yeah. So cross
Okay.
cultural means you have to cross the ocean, right, so to say. Meaning when you relate with someone from a different culture, from faraway land, right? For example,
Very alien, not
very
familiar. Okay.
not familiar. So it could be someone from Great Britain, from the United States, from Australia, from Africa, from Europe, from China, from Japan. Wow, all the countries in the world. You are functioning at the cross cultural level. So when you talk about multiculturalism, you have to be mindful of the context, whether is it intra, is it inter, or is it cross. So to
And
be multicultural, to
mhm.
be multicultural, you have to be able to be comfortable at each level.
When you say comfortable, um, can you elaborate on it?
Okay.
Because one would, how shall I say, one would not be exactly comfortable in a surrounding that one is not very used to, right?
Exactly.
And that surrounding um, might be familiar but not
Mm.
understood, right?
Yeah.
Like a Chinese person entering into a Malay kampong, or
Yeah.
a Malay person, Malaysian Malay entering a Chinatown. It's
Correct.
familiar,
Mm.
but it's not exactly understood, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um, and I guess, so yeah, so perhaps you can say, what do you mean by comfortable?
Comfortable means you can uh, understand yourself. In other words, you know how
Ah,
to relate with the person who is not like you. You cannot
okay,
assume that the other person is like you. So, in
right,
other words, you have to be mindful that um, you may not know some of the sensitivities of the other party. So, in other words, when you relate at different levels, you need to be mindful about the the sensitivities of each context.
right,
And this is where, based on my research, I find that when I was working in the American company, which is at the cross-cultural level, there were certain behaviors that I have to put on that were not comforting for me, because I grew up as a Malay, where challenging your superior or giving feedback to my superior is not expected. But in the cross-cultural workplace, particularly in an American setting, you are expected to speak up. So,
right.
so in other words, what is acceptable in one um, interface may not be in another.
Okay, so
So,
what is acceptable in one culture
yeah,
might not be acceptable in another culture.
correct.
And the word you used, comfort, being comfortable, is
Yeah,
quite interesting, because you just mentioned that when you worked in an American company, there was some anxiety because you had to behave in a manner that you were not used to behaving in.
exactly.
Correct? Okay.
Like for example, in an America, I mean, I still recall this. When I joined the American company, you're supposed to have what you call pre dinner drinks. In other words, you have to have a glass of yeah, maybe orange juice or something. And you're
Right.
supposed to go around like a social butterfly
Hmm.
and meet people and say, introduce yourself. Yeah.
Right.
I'm not
Right.
used to it. I'm not used to that growing up in the intra cultural setting, because
Right.
in the Malay culture, it is a sit down and eating culture, whereas in the American culture, it is a stand up and drink culture. So,
Right. Yeah. And walk
so
around, and that's
walk
that's
around,
how. Yeah. Hmm.
walk around and socialize. So it is discomforting.
Okay, so how did you deal with it? Did you say, I don't want to do it, or did you decide, okay, I'll rise to the challenge and figure out? And what was it that you had to navigate in order to arrive at something that you were happy and comfortable to be
Yeah.
in?
Well, initially it was there was some discomfort, but you get used to it. But you will find that there will be many Malays like me who will not attend cocktails because they're not comfortable standing up and drinking.
Right. Right.
So after a while, I realized that maybe what you should do is to have tables and chairs. So people who want to drink standing up, fine. People who want to drink and sit down, there are tables and chairs rather than no chairs at all. Yeah.
Okay.
So these are some of the things that
Right. So
we
basically, what
have.
you're saying is, uh-huh.
Hmm,
Right. So basically, what you're saying is that in order to be multicultural, um, an event organizer will plan to accommodate all kinds of different methods of engagement, or create an environment that works for everybody,
yeah,
so that it isn't too strange. Is
it's
that what
not.
you're saying?
Yeah, I suppose you have to see who is coming to dinner, right? I mean, like you know the peculiarities of each culture, and when you are entertaining them or you are asking them to socialize, it has to be at their level of comfort. You have to you have to check out what is it that they are comfortable with. But I suppose over the years, I realized that in Malaysia, we are, well, some functions that I go, I attend, they will have this, what you call high table, where you're supposed to stand up, the peanuts in the on the table, and you drink. But I don't know, what is that, a new invention, social setting where you stand up, you drink, but there is a high table. I do not know
Hmm.
whether I'm making myself
Yeah,
clear.
these
Yeah, yeah,
cocktail tables. They're
cocktail
known
table.
as, yeah, right. Yeah. And
Where,
I guess what's happening there is that it is the Western approach to entertainment, or to holding a reception, with the highlights on the ease to mingle, you know,
hmm, hmm.
to mingle and to meet as many people as possible.
Yeah,
Whereas with regards to, let's say, an Eastern context or a Malaysian context,
yeah,
um, usually in that kind of a situation, it's more hierarchical and it's less egalitarian.
yeah,
So the superiors, will be positioned in a certain area, and the not so superior would be
yeah,
positioned in such an area,
yeah,
and never the twain shall meet. And I guess that's why it's like that. Um, yeah, it's interesting. It makes me think of situations where, when high-ranking
yeah,
um, statesmen or politicians or prime ministers, etc., when
yeah.
they go to other countries,
Yes.
uh, I guess then they need to be aware of protocols, social
Mm,
protocols,
yeah,
and
yeah,
the host too has to be aware of who they are hosting, so
yeah,
that they also don't do things that make their guests feel
yeah,
awkward, etc.
yeah,
So I think it's very interesting, this whole idea of context that you mentioned. That the area of cultural context
yeah,
is an important thing to always be aware of,
yeah. That's
right?
right. Yeah,
Perhaps
yeah,
maybe you can share with us, right, how you ended up um, arriving at becoming this intercultural specialist. I mean, like, what
oh,
led
yeah.
you,
Oh,
right, to arriving at this point in your life? Because you're highly respected. You've written books. You've actually created. You've actually theorized about the 16 cultural dimensions, which is actually flipping the 8 cultural dimensions from the West, and then you flipped it to say that there's the other aspect. So it's not entirely a single point of view, but we need to see the other side, which is very interesting. Perhaps maybe you can share with us how you arrived at becoming an
Oh,
interculturalist, and then your 16 dimensions.
okay. Well, I suppose I grew up in a residential school where in the early days in the 1960s we used to have teachers from Australia, teachers from US, and teachers from the UK. And I often wonder why they want to come and teach in my country, which is very hot, mosquitoes and so on. So it got me curious. And then when I was asked to apply for a scholarship, I wanted to go overseas because I want to find out more about differences, why people are different. And my first country where I look at culture was Australia, where I did my degree in anthropology. And I was always quite puzzled, why Australians are very egalitarian, the concept of mateship, you know. And then also in the university, you are expected to speak up. You can even question your professor. I wasn't that comfortable. So again, there are differences. And then when I came back, I worked for a while in an intracultural organization, which is kind of monocultural. So I was able to see, again, my own culture behaving at the workplace. And it was quite different from the Australian that I got to know when I was studying in Australia or in Melbourne. So there again, there were differences. And then I went to the States to do my master's in education. Again, I saw American from a different perspective. And then when I came back, I joined an American company. And then when I was working in the American company, I met my husband, who's from, he's British, English, British citizen, but English in terms of racial identity. So I realized that I've been exposed to Australian, to British, English, and then Americans. And all these, nationalities have differences. And then I realized that in order to study the differences, I first of all must study my own culture. So when I was working in the American multinational, I decided to study and compare the differences, why people do things differently. I realized, like, for example, when I was in the American company, things that are comfortable for me as a Malay, I was not comfortable when I worked with Americans. And what was pleasing the American managers, they were not acceptable to some of the Malay managers. Like, for example, I recall this conversation with a manager who said that, in the boardroom, when you discuss, all the points would be out there. People were debating and arguing, and in the boardroom, you're supposed to share different perspectives. So
Right.
the Americans will go out of the room and say, "Boy, that was a great meeting. All views were aired." we could hear everyone's perspective. And then the Malay manager will go out of the room and say, wow, there was blood there. People were arguing, nobody wants, you know, um, I mean, he was not obviously comfortable. So there you
Right.
have different perspective.
So the transparency aspect is not exactly appreciated that much by Eastern culture, by the non-West.
Well, I suppose because in the Asian context, and this is one of the cultural dimensions that I use in my description, when I compare cultures, which is the low context and high context. Now, this particular dimension is based on the works of Edward Hall, who studied the Japanese society. He's passed away. He was an American anthropologist who studied the Japanese culture. So the Japanese culture, very high context, which is very indirect, Asian culture, whereas the American culture, where he came from, is very low context. So there you have the Americans are very direct, whereas the Japanese are very indirect. And I think in Asia, you will find this dimension of high context, low context are very important to understand. That sometimes you are not very honest in speaking up the truth because of that high context um, dimension that you need to observe.
I guess,
Whereas,
yeah, there
yeah,
would be a reticence from the non-Western culture. Uh,
exactly.
but would this be more Asian, East Asian? I mean, like when we look at cultures moving westwards from East Asia,
Yeah,
like for instance, Indian culture, Middle Eastern culture, African
yeah,
culture, um, there is less reticence, isn't there? I mean, there appears to be a more extroversion kind of, how should I say, habits about life. It's more, it's a less, it's less, how shall I say,
less vocal,
yeah, I mean, no, as you move westwards,
move
right?
westward, most westward going to Europe,
India, you
India.
know, India, Middle East, Africa,
Yeah,
the assertion of personality becomes more stronger, you know,
I,
more, yeah. So I'm just
I'm not.
wondering whether there is a reason for this.
Well, I don't really know, but I suppose it depends on generational also. I think that there is a tendency for the young people who have been exposed to Anglos, yeah, Anglo-Saxon cultures, and picked up the directness and the speaking up in English, right? But I suppose if you grow up, say, in India, and also in traditional families that are not maybe speaking in the English language, I don't know about the local language. I mean, depends on what whether you're talking in Hindi or some other uh, some other dialects. But I suspect that people who grow up in Asia, for that matter, and speaking in their own language will not be as direct as the Americans and the British. Or so I I suppose it is changing. I mean, like now with social media and virtual technologies, and then we are having conversations on um, on Zoom. Yeah, you will find that there will be some new patterns emerging.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I suppose it depends on who you are talking to, because now I'm sure everyone considers themselves to be multicultural. If they're speaking, for example, in Malaysia, if you speak in English, so you will have a second language, right, to speak in, and so you are speaking to different people from different continents, like we do with with Zoom webinars and so on. So there you need to be mindful of how you come across. But I suppose you still want to make sure that when you disagree with another person, and especially if you are a coach, you are taught not to respond before you clarify. So, for example, if you are in a conversation as a coach, you want to make sure that you hear the other person correctly before you respond. Rather, you become very reactive to what that particular person is saying. I do not know whether I
Right.
made myself clear. So I think
Yeah.
you have to clarify before you respond.
So what you are saying is one shouldn't be too easily triggered,
Yeah, I suppose.
right?
Yeah, yeah,
And so the anxiety that you mentioned earlier about when you used to work in an American corporate environment,
yeah,
and you felt uncomfortable.
yeah,
Could it be because you were still new to the game, and you were too easily triggered? Is that the right word is that the right thing to say? That in any kind of like intercultural or cross-cultural engagement, one must, in a manner, hold space, must not be reactive, because you may not be assuming the right
yeah,
context.
yeah. I think this is important, Vernon, because the
Hmm.
most important thing when you are in an intercultural or cross-cultural interface, you want to make the correct assumption. Whatever you decide, it must be based on the correct assumptions, so that when you make a decision, you are you're not proven to be incorrect, right? So that is
Right.
why in any intercultural interface, you have to understand the context again, and the things that are not spoken.
Right.
Yeah, because if you are speaking with a culture, like for example, we were sharing about high context culture that don't speak up, and then you come from a culture which is very low context, like the Germans are considered to be very low context, very direct. Now, how are you going to carry your conversation? Because one culture wants you to speak up, and another culture wants you to wait for a while and see and find out whether the 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 whether they're making the right interpretation about a particular issue that they are discussing.
Is this emblematic or parallel to the United States versus China
Yeah,
situation?
I
Because
suppose.
it's like two, quite disparate
Yeah,
cultures and ways of seeing, right?
yeah, yeah,
And on almost every level. And so how the other engages uh, uh, with the other, how one engages with the other, needs to be done with a lot of circumspection.
Yeah,
And right, yeah,
yeah. I suppose this is where the role of the interpreter, because one is to have the language interpreter, the other one is to have the cultural interpreter. When you are in
right.
that setting, because I suppose when foreign
And this is the
leaders,
hard, yeah, this is the hard slog, right, of
yeah,
multiculturalism. The work
exactly,
that the work that needs to be put into it
yeah,
to
yeah,
arrive at mutually beneficial understanding of each other.
yeah, yeah, that's right. So
The hard slog.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Mm.
So language again. I mean, I don't know. I suppose translation has to be done, right? Like for example, if um, an American president meet a Chinese, yeah,
Yep.
um, leader, now they would both have their own interpreters, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they will have someone who translate in English and someone who translate in Mandarin. Hmm.
Yep.
So I suppose it happens everywhere else when you have a cross-cultural negotiation scenario. Yeah. So one
I
is
mean, mhm.
go ahead.
No, and I mean, like in that situation where two heads of state are meeting, I mean, like they have all the resources to prepare,
Mm,
and to get them into the right frame of mind and stuff like that. But
mm,
on for the ordinary man in the street, walking into either an intercultural or cross-cultural moment,
yeah.
right? And all he has is his wits about him. Um, we can only hope that his own lived experience saves him from being over traumatized and
Mm,
overly triggered by the differences that exist that happen
yeah.
between
Yeah.
cultures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is where I don't know whether you want to go into the cultural dimensions or we go into the concept of ethnocentric versus ethno-relative.
Yep. I
Don't know
think
what.
that's a good that's a good thing. The second one. Before we go into the 16 cultural dimensions, let's go into ethnocentric as
Hmm.
ethnocentrism and ethno-relativism, because I
Yeah.
think those two concepts, academic as they may sound, actually unpacks reality into something that's more digestible and allows us in a way
Hmm.
to even deal with our own issues when it comes to uh, intercultural and cross-cultural, engagement. So yeah,
Yeah.
please do
Yeah.
talk about that.
Well, I don't know whether you have heard of the work of Milton Bennett. He developed the 6 stages of intercultural sensitivity, and he well in his works developed this dichotomy: ethno-relative versus ethnocentric and versus ethno-relative, right? Now, when you
Hmm.
talk about ethnocentric, this is where being too much of an intercultural interface, you can be, or the tendency is to be ethnocentric. So this is
Right,
where I'm seeing, things that are happening in our country
right,
is because of you are being very ethnocentric. So ethnocentric is when you deny that um, the existence of cultural differences. We are all the same. So when you say that we are all the same, you're becoming very ethnocentric, and then this is when you deny, you deny that your cultural experience is the only one that is real, whereas others are, not so important. So this is where when you are too much functioning at the intra cultural level, you can sound, or you may sound to be very ethnocentric because you think that your culture is the way others should follow. Yeah, so that's denial. And then the other one is defense. This
Right.
is where you think you are superior and they are inferior. And you feel threatened and you are highly critical of others. And what is strange may be labeled as stupid. I think
Right. Yep.
you can have some discussion on this, you know. So
Hmm.
one's worldview is polarized into us and them. Okay, so that is still ethnocentric. Now,
Hmm.
the third phase of ethnocentric is minimization, where other cultures are trivialized or romanticized, and one tends to deny differences. So you're colorblind and you always seek similarities. So ethnocentric is when you deny, you defend, and you minimize cultural differences. And
Right.
I,
So color blindness is actually
mm,
a kind of ethnocentricity.
yeah,
Ethnocentricity.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's an interesting conclusion. But when you think about it, it is actually quite true
yeah,
because you're basically not being aware
mm,
of differences and nuances of
yeah,
separation. Yeah.
exactly.
Okay.
I mean, this is my concern about what's happening in our country.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
being ethnocentric.
Mm-hmm.
When
Mm-hmm.
now moving uh, away from ethnocentric, you want to become ethno-relative. So when you start to be ethno-relative, then you begin to accept. Yeah, I accept but may not agree with other cultures. So generally, I am curious and respectful. So remember, I was curious and I was, concerned about differences.
Yep. Yep.
You know? So this is the beginning of being ethno-relative.
Right. So curiosity is a good thing.
Yeah,
To want to know rather than pretend it's not there.
yeah, right.
Wow. Okay. Cool.
So you experience your own culture as one of the many um, cultures that you need to live with. Yeah. So your culture is one of the many cultures. So you realize that when you are curious about others. So then you move into adaptation. Yeah? Adaptation is when you see the world through different eyes and you make intentional changes in your own behavior and values. So you begin to accept differences. Yeah? And
Wow. Yep. Yep. You begin to
and
learn how to
learn how to adjust.
adjust and maybe even assume some of the
Yeah,
lifestyle habits, even, right?
yeah. You begin to bridge.
Yeah. Right.
You can comprehend why the differences exist. Yeah, and then the last phase of this continuum to and becoming ethno-relative is to integrate.
Mm-hmm.
So integrate is I easily move in and out of different cultural contexts and
Right.
worldviews. So this is
Right.
going back again to intra, inter, and cross.
Right.
So it's really being I mean another way of looking at the ethnocentric continuum, ethnocentric and ethno-relative. So I
Wow.
don't know where.
This is brilliant, Dr. Asma. I mean, like the whole idea of multiculturalism as just all of us being different and you know coming together. Like the New Seekers song. Um,
What?
I'd like to build a world, a home.
So
That,
yeah,
but it requires a lot of work.
yeah, a
If
lot of
we're going to
work.
do that in the most equitable, the most fair
Yeah,
most multicultural way, it
Yeah.
really needs a lot of work, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and the work starts by knowing your own culture first. So that is
Why?
why.
Why do I need to know my own culture? Is it
So that
so that I will
so
have a
that
sense of self that is unwavering and confident?
yes, that's one. And
Hmm.
also you can detect the differences.
Ah, okay.
Right?
Right. So if you,
Otherwise,
hmm,
yeah. I mean, a lot of Malaysians who go abroad, particularly I notice this. It's part of my own observation. When you go to America, you want to be like the Americans. You go to Australia, you want to be like the Aussies. I mean, I've got so many examples, like drinking, for example. I've always with a group of Malay students, and in Australia, every Friday you go to the pub, right?
yep, the Guild Tavern.
Yeah,
I
right.
know that custom very well.
Yeah, I mean, for you is okay because you are allowed to drink in your religious,
Hmm. Hmm.
beliefs. But for the Malay boys, you're not supposed to drink. But I suppose because they didn't understand their own religion or own Malay
Hmm.
customs, they join in the Friday night, whatever, drinking. So you find this, if you don't understand your culture, the Malays use this term terbawa-bawa. Do you know that?
Right.
Slang? Yeah, you get carried away. So that is why I find that when you work with foreigners, the most important thing is for you to understand your own culture.
But what if you actually like the other culture so much that you want to be a part of it?
But it's okay.
And you
You're there.
feel that you are more comfortable doing that than doing this. I mean, like for instance, I come from a Catholic family,
Yeah,
and I was brought up in a very strict Catholic upbringing.
yeah,
And it came a point in time in my life when I decided, that I didn't want to be so Catholic, although I did believe that I wanted to be Christ-like. And I
yeah,
explained it to my
yeah,
parents, and they went like, "We don't approve, but you're old enough to decide for yourself. What makes
yeah,
you happy.
yeah.
So we hope that you won't find the fires of hell too hot." Kind of thing.
So, uh,
you
I
know.
suppose, yeah, I suppose for you, it's, maybe your religious uh, conditioning allows you to be, flexible. But for
Right.
Muslims, I'm talking about, growing up as a Muslim. If you are in a group, you have to make
Hmm.
sure that you are not seen as a deviant.
Or the group will
Or,
rescue you from
or
your
yeah,
deviation.
because the group
Yeah.
will ostracize you, and when you need
Hmm.
help, they may not come to your help.
Okay,
So
so
this,
that's the collectivist. That's
yes,
the
that is
collectivist spirits of
right,
Malay culture. So I
correct.
guess I guess we need to be aware of that, but at the same time, I mean, like if we want a world to be more equitable,
Yeah,
we also need to be aware of, I guess, how it may not operate well within a particular. I mean, like if you are like that, maybe in the Western world, then it starts to maybe create problems, right, for you. And so
yeah,
what happens then? What is right and what is wrong? I mean, like for instance, like if I may be so bold, right, as to ask you about like honor killings.
yeah,
Okay, so like
yeah.
like the South Asian Muslim communities in Britain,
Mm,
there were instances of honor killings.
mm,
Okay, and honor killings were seen as that is the thing we do in our culture. So
yeah,
how do we address those kinds of situations?
mm, this,
Because on the one hand, it is it has been normalized in that culture.
Mm.
But in the Western culture, based on the rule of law and that everybody's equal, and
Yeah,
there's freedom of individualism and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah.
How do you deal with those kinds of disparities?
Well, I'm not quite sure because I find that when you carry this particular ritual or observance or something that the honor killing is very evident, very it's commonly practiced, right, in group-oriented culture, or shame, for example, shame-driven culture. So again, concepts in my cultural dimension talks about shame and guilt, and then collectivistic and individualistic. Yeah?
Right. Yeah.
So here you have a practice that is allowable. You're allowed in the collectivistic, religious, and what is it? Shame-driven culture, and then you are practicing it, or you're observing it in a different culture, in a different landscape, you know. Or let me see, I'm trying to go back to the inter, and cross. So here you have a practice that is observed at the intracultural level, being observed in a cross-cultural setting, right?
Right. Hmm.
So this is where it can be very problematic.
Yeah, yeah, it does become problematic because it's ways of seeing, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's
yes.
and so I guess when moving into judging it
Hmm.
from our own point of view, right?
Yeah, yeah,
We need
that's
to
right.
be aware
Yeah,
that there are so many ways of
yeah.
how should I say, yeah, difficult. It's a difficult
Yeah,
one, but
I mean,
it
you see,
but
people are interpreting
mhm,
the issue from both perspectives, and both perspectives are right, based on what they have come to you know to observe,
accept to observe and
accept.
accept. I
Yeah,
mean, like for instance, me and my Catholic family and me deciding not to go to church. I mean, like
yeah,
they looked at me and they decided, okay, well, you go to hell, you go to hell.
good,
So
yeah,
why even bother to live? And they could have slit my throat if it was several
yeah,
hundred years ago, right?
yeah, yeah,
But I guess over time,
yeah,
people came up with within the culture that we lived in, that wasn't the thing to do.
yeah,
But I guess in certain other societies, they haven't they you know they haven't come around to that conclusion yet. Yeah. Okay. Well, we've come to 1 hour
mm,
of talking, and I really, really like the stuff that we've gone through, the
right,
the uh, the ethnocentricity to ethno-relativity concepts, right?
mm,
And before that, you spoke about the 3 steps, right?
yeah,
Moving from one to the other. From sorry, the
interfaith.
denial, defense. What were the
Okay,
6? The
the
denial, where there's
denial.
nobody else. There's nobody else sorry, there's nobody else like us.
Yeah,
So everybody else who isn't like us is not
yeah,
actually equal to us, right?
yeah.
That's denial, right?
Denial.
Then
Yeah,
defense.
denial. Yeah, there is a little thought of the other. You don't think of the
Yeah,
others.
yeah.
Yeah,
Or you
you
or you or
deny
you or you discount them. They are they
discount them.
are subhuman,
Yeah,
right?
you don't consider the existence of cultural differences. When
Okay,
you
right.
deny. Okay,
Yeah,
then you have
yeah.
defense.
Right.
Defense
Where
is when you see things in terms of us and them.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Defense, and then
Right. Yep.
minimize. Yeah,
You
you
minimize the other side. Yep.
yeah.
Okay. The other. Yep.
Then you begin to
Okay.
accept, but you may not agree, but you
Mm-hmm,
accept that there are other other worldviews.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you have adaptation.
Right.
You see the world through many eyes, many different
Right.
set of eyes.
Right. Yep.
This is what I hope Malaysians, I don't know, some groups of Malaysian and
Yep.
integration. So it's, I don't know how we can talk about integration, because I still feel that our population are not um, ethno-relative. They're very ethnocentric. I mean, we see that every day, you know, people making ethnocentric
Right. Yep. Ethnocentric
decisions.
decisions in terms of how they want to live their lives.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I don't know. I suppose we have to, like you say, a hard slog ahead.
Yeah. It's a hard
School,
slog ahead.
the
I,
schools
I
have,
know that. Yeah, I know that for a fact, being
yeah,
a Sarani myself, in
yeah,
that I'm always navigating into intercultural or cross-cultural engagements,
yeah,
being a minority of minorities.
yeah.
And I do know that there is work that I do, but because I've been doing it ever since I was born, right? It stops being work. It becomes intuitive.
Mm,
And so I feel like maybe my what keeps me sane is my curiosity. And you mentioned curiosity earlier
yeah,
on, and I think that's so important. And in
yeah,
recent times, a lot of human development scientists,
yeah.
human improvement coaches and stuff, they say that curiosity is such an important
Mm,
um, trait, right?
yeah,
That if
yeah,
you're curious but not fearful, you'll get ahead further. You will develop better if
yeah,
you're curious and not
yeah,
fearful. So whatever you fear, I
yeah.
guess the advice is to be curious about it, right? And
Yeah,
to unpack it.
yeah. Curious and observe.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you have
Yeah.
to observe how people
Yes.
behave in different contexts and learn
Correct.
to
Yeah.
uh,
Okay.
recognize. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent, Dr. Asma. I
Mm.
think this is the second time we're speaking about this, and I think it'll be an ongoing, intermittent,
Oh dear.
episodic program, which one day we will sell the idea to National Geographic, and you and I will traipse around the world,
Oh dear.
unpacking multiculturalism.
Yeah, yeah. I have many other concepts that I have.
Oh
I
yeah,
mean,
I'm sure. Yes,
yeah.
in the
So,
weeks ahead, we will slowly focus or highlight or spotlight each of them. Yeah, so
okay.
that the rest of us can also appreciate multiculturalism.
Yeah, I mean, there is a society for, if you were to Google SITAR,
Right.
SIETAR,
Uh-huh.
Society for Intercultural Education, Training and Research.
Right.
They are into this kind of issues, I
Okay.
mean,
Right.
uh,
So we can
I,
bring them aboard one day. Maybe
yeah,
you could think of some of the leading personalities there who
yes,
might
I
want to
have a
talk about.
conference.
Yeah,
Yeah,
fantastic. So
yeah,
let's keep that in mind. And
okay.
thank you so much
Oh,
for bearing with us through the technical difficulties earlier on and soldiering with us. And really appreciate your insights, Dr. Asma. Look forward to future episodes of Multiculturalism, the hard slog ahead. Okay. So, any last words? Any words of advice you want to give people before we say good night?
oh, well, just keep on observing before you make a statement.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you
Before
work,
you react.
before
Yeah.
you react, when you work across cultures, especially when you
Right.
work across cultures. I mean, for
Yep.
that matter, any interaction, right? Any,
Yes. It always helps for any interaction not to react, but
not
to
to react
respond.
to
Yeah.
response. Yeah.
Yeah. To
So
be thoughtful in your response. Yeah.
yeah. Well,
Wonderful.
thank you for the opportunity to speak up. Because
Yes.
this is a version of speak up. And
Yes.
just the other one is I just want to say that, you need to move from a monocultural mindset to an international mindset.
Right.
So,
Yes.
talking
Yeah.
about multiculturalism, you are, I guess, moving towards the international mindset.
Right.
Because the world is going to be multicultural.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it is. And yeah, and we need to deal with it, right? We need to be
Yeah,
able to roll with it. We need to be able to
yeah,
appreciate and celebrate it and
yeah,
enjoy it. Yeah.
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 This is why I'm so worried about those in Malaysia that are only functioning at the intra
Right.
cultural level.
Well, we will work on that one together, all of us.
Okay,
Okay.
okay,
Okay.
alright,
Thank you
then.
so much, Dr. Asma. See you
Okay,
in our next episode sometime in the weeks ahead. Okay.
okay.
Good
All
night.
right,
Thank you
bye.
so
Right.
much. Right.
Okay,
Bye bye.
okay, bye.
And that was Multiculturalism, the Hard Slog Ahead, presented by Speaking Up Network, an initiative that is led by Anima Kosai, bringing together humanitarian centered, equity centered individuals and organizations to have conversations that can lead mankind forward. And on that note, I'll be signing off. Thank you so much, Rocky, David, and Petits Petits Etoile for joining us and listening in. Yeah, so if there's anything that you would like to find out in terms of the Speaking Up Network, we'll be uploading this podcast at the site. It's to get to it, you go to social.speakingup.network, and that's where you will find Anima Kosai and myself and various other individuals, powering the Speaking Up Network ahead, because we believe that mankind can move forward if we have a speaking up culture, which actually starts with listening. Okay, so yeah, wrap your head around that. And on that note, this is Vernon Adrian Emuang signing off from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Bye, Rocky. Bye, David and Petit Etoile. Thanks for being there. Good night.